I moved into the house about a year ago. It wasn't perfect. It was old, creaky, and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was cheap, and that was what mattered. The landlord gave me a quick tour, pointing out the quirks of the place. The drafty windows, the temperamental heater, the basement that stayed damp no matter what. Then, almost as an afterthought, he gestured to the far corner of the basement, where a large white chest freezer sat against the wall. "This stays locked," he told me. "Don't touch it. Don't mess with it. It's not part of the rental." I remember laughing nervously, waiting for him to explain. Maybe it was broken, or maybe it just didn't work anymore. But he didn't elaborate. He just made me promise not to touch it. At first, I didn't think much of it. I had no reason to go digging around in there. The basement was mostly for laundry, and I avoided it when I could. It was always colder than the rest of the house, like the air itself was heavier down there. But then, a few months in, I heard it. I was loading the dryer when I caught a faint metallic rattle. It was quick, like a chain shifting, or a lock being nudged. I froze, listening. After a few seconds of silence, I brushed it off. Houses make noises after all. Except, the next night, it happened again. This time, I heard it clearly. The padlock on the freezer jingling as though someone, or something, was tugging on it from inside. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, heart pounding, staring down at that dimly lit corner. The single bulb above the laundry machines cast long shadows, and the freezer sat just beyond them, half in the dark. It didn't move. Nothing did, but the sound was still echoing in my ears. I didn't go down that night. Over the next week, it happened more often. Always late, always when I was alone in the house. Sometimes it was a faint thump, like something shifting inside. Sometimes it was the rattle of the lock. Once, I swore I heard a low scraping noise, like fingernails dragging along the inside of metal. I stopped doing laundry after dark. One night, curiosity, or stupidity, got the better of me. I went down there with my phone flashlight and stood in front of the freezer. The lock was still clamped tight, a thick, rusted padlock that looked older than the house itself. I crouched down, listening. The air was freezing cold near it, far colder than the rest of the basement. And then I heard it. A muffled sound, just beneath the lid. A thud, then another. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell over. I didn't even finish the laundry. I bolted upstairs, locked the basement door, and told myself I must have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. A few days later, I decided to ask the landlord. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I casually mentioned the freezer, asked why it was locked, if it was broken or something. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "Don't worry about it," he said flatly. "Just leave it alone." That was it. No explanation. His voice was firm, almost angry. That night, the rattling came again. Louder this time. I heard it all the way from the kitchen, like something inside was growing desperate. I tried to sleep, but the sounds echoed in my head. At some point, I woke up to a loud bang from below, like the lid of the freezer slamming against its lock. I didn't go down. I didn't even move. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to breathe. The next morning, I forced myself to check. When I opened the basement door, I was hit with an icy draft, like the air had been sucked out of a freezer and blown straight into my face. I crept down the steps, every nerve in my body on edge. The padlock was still there, but the freezer, it had shifted. It wasn't flush against the wall anymore. There were fresh drag marks on the concrete floor, like it had been pulled a few inches out, from the inside. That was 2 weeks ago, Since then, I've stopped going into the basement altogether. My laundry piles up, and I pay to use a laundromat across town. Every night, I hear it. The rattling, the scraping, sometimes even faint, muffled knocks, like fists against the lid. But last night, there was something new. As I lay in bed, I heard the freezer slam again. Then silence. I thought maybe, just maybe, it had finally stopped, until I heard the unmistakable sound of the basement door creaking open. I locked it before bed. I know I did. And now I'm sitting here, writing this, because I can hear it. Not downstairs, not rattling in the corner of the basement. I can hear the lock jingling just outside my bedroom door. I bought the house at an auction. It was cheap, too cheap, and everyone warned me about the repairs it would need. But I wasn't scared off. The structure was solid, and I thought with some time and effort, I could make it livable. For the first month, everything seemed fine. The plumbing groaned, the lights flickered, and the place smelled like damp wood. But that was all expected. The basement, though, that was different. It always felt colder than it should, like stepping into a cave. One weekend, I decided to replace the warped floorboards near the laundry area. I pried one up, expecting to see dirt and concrete. Instead, I uncovered the top of a staircase. Narrow, steep, and leading straight down into darkness. But then I noticed the walls. Every few feet carved into the stone were tally marks. Long vertical lines crossed through by shorter ones in groups of 5. Dozens of them, hundreds, like someone had been keeping count for years. The air grew colder the longer I stayed. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but my gut screamed at me to leave. I shut the door, climbed the stairs, and nailed the floorboards back in place. I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. At night, I'd wake up certain I'd heard something from below, the faint creak of a door or the muffled sound of footsteps. Sometimes it was scratching, distant but steady, like nails dragging against stone. The noises never lasted long enough for me to be sure, but I stopped sleeping soundly. One night, I woke to the sound of wood splintering. My stomach dropped. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed to the basement. The floorboards I'd nailed shut were cracked open. The air seeping out was colder than ever. I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, staring at the jagged gap. And then I heard it. Not scratching this time, not footsteps, breathing. Slow, heavy, and coming from the darkness below. I stumbled back, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room with every light on, ears straining for another sound. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even a dream. I told myself I was done with that part of the house, that I'd never set foot down there again. But last night proved me wrong. I woke around 2 a.m. to a new sound, the unmistakable creak of stairs under weight. Not the basement stairs, the forgotten stairs. They were coming up. I held my breath, every muscle in my body locked as the sound grew louder. Step by step, deliberate and slow. Then silence. I thought maybe it had stopped. Maybe whatever I heard had gone back down. But when I finally gathered the courage to get out of bed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The basement door was open, not wide, just a crack. Wide enough to see that the lock was still latched, but the wood around it had splintered. Something had forced its way through. And tonight, as I sit here writing this, I can hear it again. Not from the basement, not from the forgotten stairs, from the hallway outside my room. I'd been renting the basement apartment for 3 months before I noticed it. The place wasn't great, musty air, low ceilings, and exposed beams, but the rent was cheap, and I was grateful just to have my own space. The landlord barely mentioned the basement when I signed the lease. He just warned me it was unfinished storage and told me to stay out of the back half because of mold. I didn't argue. I did my laundry down there sometimes, but otherwise I avoided it. One night, I dropped a sock while carrying laundry to the dryer, and it rolled beneath a stack of old paint cans shoved in the corner. I crouched down to grab it, and that's when I saw it. A faint, pulsing red light. It took me a second to process what I was looking at. Wedged high up in the rafters, angled down toward the room, was a small black box. A camera. The light was on. My skin prickled. I grabbed a chair, climbed up, and pulled it down. It was dusty, the lens smeared, but the light kept blinking. It wasn't plugged into anything. The cord dangled uselessly from the back. It shouldn't have been working. I yanked the cord out completely, and the light went dark. My hands were shaking as I stuffed it in a garbage bag and shoved it outside in the bin. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the apartment sounded amplified. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. I told myself it had to be old, maybe left behind by the last tenant. The battery had somehow held a charge. It was weird, but not supernatural. The next morning, I went down to switch laundry again. My stomach dropped. The camera was back. Same spot, tucked between the beams, red light pulsing. I froze. I knew I'd thrown it away. I'd carried the bag outside myself. My first thought was that the landlord had come in. But why would he put it back? Why would he even want it there? I didn't touch it this time. I just backed up slowly and left the basement. That night, I called a friend and told him about it. He laughed at first, then said, maybe I should set up my own camera, catch the landlord sneaking in. It made sense, so I borrowed a cheap motion sensor cam and set it on the laundry shelf facing the basement rafters. The next morning, I checked the footage. At 3:12 a.m., the video showed the camera in the rafters turning off on its own. The red light blinked out. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere off frame, a shape moved. It wasn't clear. A shadow, tall, human-shaped, but distorted, like the lens couldn't quite focus on it. The figure reached up, touched the camera, and the light blinked back on. Then the video cut out. I didn't go to work that day. I couldn't stop replaying the clip, trying to convince myself it was just bad quality, some glitch. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. That night, I barely moved from the couch, every light on in the apartment. Around midnight, I heard something. A soft creak directly above me, where the rafters ran. I turned the TV volume down. The sound came again, slower this time, deliberate, like weight shifting on the beams. I told myself I was imagining it, but then dust drifted down from the ceiling, sprinkling onto the coffee table in front of me. Something was up there. I grabbed my phone and went for the front door, but when I reached it, the knob wouldn't turn. It was locked, not just from my side, but like it had been jammed. Then, from the basement, the red light started to glow brighter, not pulsing anymore, solid. I couldn't bring myself to go back down there. I stayed awake the whole night, huddled in the corner of the room, waiting for morning. When the sun came up, the light was gone. The camera wasn't in the rafters anymore. I thought maybe, somehow, it was over. I went outside to check the trash bin. The bag I'd thrown away the first night was still there, tied shut. Inside, it was the same camera. The light was blinking again. And when I looked back at my apartment window, I realized the lens wasn't pointing anywhere random. It was pointed directly at me.